I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the new Skoda Kamiq, the smallest SUV that Skoda currently have on sale. It's a brand new model, we haven't seen it before, and it lands in Australia this week with really sharp pricing. $27,990 drive away for this base model with a manual, add $2,000 for the auto that this particular car has, and I reckon this doesn't look like a base model at all. I actually thought it was an up-spec car when it was delivered to us with these really clean chrome lines, nice decently sized wheels. You know, it presents as quite a premium option, particularly when you consider that this is effectively Skoda's version of the Volkswagen T-Cross, which in itself is a raised Polo. So these aren't especially expensive or luxurious cars, but Skoda have done a really great job in transforming it and making it really Skoda-like. So it feels like a scaled down Karoq, which in itself feels like a scaled down Kodiaq. The family vibe is very much there. And it starts in this very presentable interior. We have the Skoda steering wheel with this beautiful perforated leather, feels really expensive and sporty in the hand. And we look forward at standard virtual cockpit dials. Now, navigation isn't standard, so I often think that these virtual or digital gauges without nav is a bit odd, like what are you supposed to look at? But you can of course get navigation as part of an option package, and wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto is standard on this 8-inch screen here. Now, wireless CarPlay is optional, so it can pay to make a few changes to the spec of the car and just option it up to make it a little bit kind of more fully featured tech-wise. But you do get a lot of good stuff as standard, including these nice seats, which have suede inserts on the side, fabric in the center. They are manually adjustable, but they're quite shapely and comfortable. We do get this touchscreen, as I've already mentioned, and a lot more soft materials than you get in the T-Cross. It's soft up here on the dash and on the doors. A Polo or a T-Cross doesn't have that. So it's another example of Skoda, you know, technically being below Volkswagen in the hierarchy, but actually their interiors are often better. So you can get yourself quite a good deal by going the Skoda route. In terms of practicality, it's also good. We have standard wireless smartphone charging down here with guides so that your phone won't slide off the pad. Of course, we don't know how big phones are going to get in future, but at the moment it does fit. Cup holders between the seats. We have an armrest here. The armrest is not adjustable for height, but you can at least extend the length. And the door bins are big enough for a big bottle, but they're not flock lined. On the whole though, I would say this is one of the nicest interiors in this new city-sized SUV class. So that's up front. Next, we'll check out the back seat. Now the doors open fairly wide and the roofline continues pretty straight. So, you know, fitting a couple of child seats would be fairly simple. Door closes with a reassuring thunk, and the Isofix ports are easy to find here on the outboard seats. Plus, space is really good for this segment. As you can see on the outside, Skoda have pushed the wheels right out to the corners on this car, and that has generated a lot of space in the cabin. So I'm 6 foot, headroom's no problem. We don't have a sunroof here, it's optional, but I think even if we had it, it would be fine. Legroom behind my own driving position is also generous, there's lots of it. Tow room's good as well. Now we do have a 5th seat. The hump in the floor is pretty high, so I'd probably avoid using it too often and think of this more as a 4-seater car, but unlike some small SUVs, it is a genuine 4-seater. The back seats in this class are so often way too small for adults. That isn't the case here in the Kamiq. Plus, the amenities are really generous. We have air vents down here and also 2 USB-C ports, plus there are 2 USB-Cs up front. Now the materials do revert to hard up the top here, but we do have cloth inserts for the doors and big bottle holders too. So all in all, this is a really livable little car that if you needed it for your second family car, I think it would do the job very nicely. That's also the case for the rear end of the Kamiq, which firstly is attractive. It doesn't look a little odd or misshapen like some shrunken down SUVs. I actually think it's quite crisp and nice. And shockingly at this price point, a power tailgate is standard fit. Not sure how necessary it is given this is a pretty small vehicle, but still, if you have your hands full, that's a really nice convenience. It opens up to reveal a 400-litre boot, also pretty big for this class, and as you can see, Skoda really doesn't mind a net. You get 4 of them with the car. This one down the bottom is obviously going to hold your groceries down, which is good, but really nothing is going to be rolling around and rattling in this boot, so that's good. We do have storage off to the left and the right. We have a double-sided boot floor. One side, this side here, is rubberized, so if you've got dirty stuff to put in the back, this is perfect. Flip it over and there's carpet on the other side, plus we have a space saver spare and hooks and a detachable boot light. So I mean, in this class where so often the boot just gives you a big hole and nothing else, the Skoda really excels. Press the button to close the tailgate. We can jump in the front seat and take this thing for a drive. So what's the new Skoda Kamiq like to drive? Well, you know what, this is a really endearing little SUV to drive, and the overwhelming impression you get is that you're buying into engineering that's worth considerably more what Skoda are actually charging for this car in Australia. Yes, I am on record saying that the small SUV segment is overpriced compared to the hatchbacks that they're based on, but that factor is ameliorated quite a bit here in the Kamiq by the fact that Skoda basically stuffed this car full of equipment as standard even on the base model. Things like proximity entry, LED headlights, LED indicators with the sequential scroll, adaptive cruise control, lane keep assist, ambient lighting in the interior, an electric tailgate, dual zone climate control. Like, there's a lot of car here for $27,990 SUV or not. Now we do have to add $2,000 for the auto that our particular test car sports, but this engine and the manual gearbox is a really nice combination. How do I know? Well, we have a Polo with this engine and gearbox in the family, which has done quite a few Ks now and, you know, has also been endearing. So when I talk about the engine, what has it got under the bonnet? A 1-litre turbocharged 3-cylinder, which is now becoming quite common for this class. And here in the Kamiq, it produces 85 kilowatts of power and 200 Newton meters of torque. So that's a torque figure that the Volkswagen Group's 4-cylinder engines were making 5 years ago. They can now produce that reliably from a 3-cylinder unit, and that's the way it feels on the road. Surprisingly torquey for such a small displacement. However, the fuel economy is better than when they had 4-cylinder engines running this kind of power and torque. And the fuel economy you can get from the Kamiq is reliably under 6 litres per 100 kilometres if you drive it sensibly but not ridiculously slowly for fuel economy. And even if you hammer it, you're not going to blow it out that much because this engine just seems really resilient to driving styles from an economy perspective, and it's pretty impressive. It's also reasonably refined. I do think that in the Skoda Kamiq compared to the Volkswagen T-Cross or the Volkswagen Polo, there's a little bit less sound insulation everywhere. So you can hear this engine making a few more disconcerting noises than in other vehicles that have this powertrain, but it's just a little whine here and there or a little clunk from the gearbox. It's nothing bad or off-putting or broken. It's just that you hear a bit more mechanical action in this car is sort of how I would put that. Now that gearbox is a 7-speed dual clutch automatic. It's a Volkswagen Group DSG, and on the whole it's good. However, unlike some other current generation Skodas, it can be a little bit clunky actually taking up first gear, which is something I haven't felt from a DSG in quite a long time actually. It feels a little bit retrograde, but it only seems to be when you kind of a little bit abruptly apply throttle off the line. But as a long-term DSG owner, without fault, I'll point out, it's a little worse than what I've come to expect. So there is that. So if you can drive a manual and you want to save $2,000, the 6-speed manual is actually quite a sweet thing, and that's probably what I would do in this car. But ultimately, most people are going to want the automatic. Now, what about the rest of the driving experience in the Kamiq? Well, the ride and handling is pretty good. The ride is compliant. The rear end does have a torsion beam like almost every car in this segment, and so there can be a little bit of boom and resonance when you put the rear suspension through quite a big divot. But on the whole, the ride is a compliant and a comfortable one, particularly at the front end. There's a bit of suspension noise. It's nothing terrible. And on the whole, I think you would call this a comfortable SUV. It does run a comfort tune of the suspension that you can get on the MQB A0 platform, not a sports suspension, so it isn't as rough as a Polo R-Line, I would point out. And you know, it's quite a well-balanced thing. The handling too is remarkably agile. It really doesn't mind being tossed around. The steering isn't as fast as some rivals like the Ford Puma, but it's still reasonably satisfying, and the steering wheel itself is lovely. But yeah, the chassis is among the best in the segment, and it's quite happy to be driven athletically and quickly down a country road. And while you're doing that, you'll enjoy the benefit of those safety systems I've already mentioned, because we have standard AEB, adaptive cruise, lane keep assist in this vehicle. We don't have standard blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert, but you can get those as you move up the range or you dabble into option packs. I should also mention that you can actually get a 4-cylinder Kamiq, and that is quite unusual for this segment now that's moving to turbo 3 cylinders, at least from the European side of things. So there will be a 110 kilowatt 4-cylinder petrol, basically the Golf engine, coming to the Kamiq at a later date, and that will give this car even more grand touring ability than it already has in a surprising measure. So that's a first look at the new Skoda Kamiq. At this price point, I reckon this vehicle has a lot to offer. It's got a punchy drivetrain that's also really economical in the real world. It has an interior that punches above the price that Skoda are asking for it, and I also think it's a pretty presentable looking vehicle. Couple that to the good warranty and the decently priced servicing, and you've got a car that would be pretty easy to own, I reckon. And you'd want to closely consider this when comparing it to its cousin, the Volkswagen T-Cross. But would you have one over a Ford Puma? Let me know down below this video in the comments your thoughts about the Skoda Kamiq. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.